Let's talk about respect, not the kind you demand, but the kind you command through who you are and how you carry yourself. Because here's the truth, the fastest way to lose someone's respect is by making certain mistakes most women don't even realize they're making. Today, I'm going to call them out, plain and simple, so you can stop handing away your power and start getting the respect you deserve. When you find yourself constantly over-explaining, you're not just communicating facts, you're communicating insecurity. The more you justify, rationalize, and pile on explanations for your choices, your actions, or your boundaries, the more you unintentionally signal that you doubt yourself. Think about it. When a person is confident in their stance, they don't feel the need to convince everyone else to see it their way. They simply state what they believe, what they're doing, or what they're not willing to do, and they leave it at that. Over-explaining happens when you feel the other person's approval is essential, so you try to cover every angle, every possible objection, and every reason why you're right, but in doing that, you're actually handing over your authority. You're telling them their perception has the power to define your decision, and you've now put yourself in a weaker position. Over time, this habit chips away at the respect you receive in a relationship. Respect is rooted in the belief that you know who you are, you trust yourself, and you stand by what you say. When you continually over-explain, you plant doubt in the other person's mind. If she's so sure about this, why does she feel the need to convince me so hard? It starts to look like you don't believe your own words unless someone else validates them. This isn't about being dismissive or cold. It's about trusting that what you've said is enough. You don't need to provide a court case every time you express a thought or set a boundary. The psychology behind over-explaining often ties to wanting to be liked, accepted, or understood. For many women, it's a learned behavior. You're growing up being told to be polite, agreeable, and accommodating can lead you to believe that the more you explain, the less likely you'll upset someone. But here's the twist. People don't respect endless accommodation. They respect clarity, decisiveness, and self-assurance. If you think about leaders you admire, you'll notice they rarely over-explain. They choose their words, deliver them, and move forward without apologizing for having a perspective. Breaking the habit of over-explaining requires awareness and practice. First, pay attention to when you do it. Maybe someone asks you why you're not attending an event, and you launch into a long story about your week, your schedule, and your mood. Instead, you could simply say, "I won't be able to make it." That's enough. Or if you set a boundary like saying no to lending money, you don't have to offer a 10-minute speech about your budget, your bills, and your personal philosophy. A simple, "I'm not in a position to do that," sends a clearer, stronger message. It also means being comfortable with silence and letting the other person react without rushing in to soften it. That discomfort you feel in those moments is where your power grows. It's you teaching yourself that your words stand on their own. You're not responsible for managing someone else's emotions about your choices. You're responsible for showing up as someone who respects herself enough to speak with intention and brevity. When you master this, you'll notice a shift. People will take your words more seriously. They'll be less likely to push against your boundaries because you've shown them you don't need to justify them. And perhaps most importantly, you'll feel more grounded in yourself. The approval you were once chasing from others will come from within, and that's the kind of confidence that makes someone command, not chase respect. Tolerating disrespect even once sends a powerful message, not just to the other person, but to yourself, that it's acceptable. The first time someone crosses a line, whether it's through words, tone, behavior, or lack of consideration, you are at a pivotal moment. Your response determines how they'll treat you going forward. If you let it slide, even with a small laugh, a shrug, or telling yourself it's not a big deal, you're essentially setting a precedent. People learn how to treat you by what you allow. Disrespect has a way of starting small, testing the waters, and then growing if it goes unchecked. That sarcastic jab, the dismissive tone, the casual ignoring of your opinion, those moments are warning signs. If you ignore them, you're telling the other person, consciously or not, that your boundaries are flexible and your self-worth is negotiable. Part of the reason people tolerate disrespect is that they want to avoid confrontation. It feels easier to brush things off than to risk tension, an argument, or the fear of being labeled difficult. But what you're really doing is protecting the other person's comfort at the expense of your own dignity. This is especially common in relationships where emotions are involved. You may rationalize someone's behavior because you care about them, or you tell yourself they didn't mean it. But intentions don't erase impact. If the impact of someone's words or actions diminishes you, undermines you, or makes you feel small, it's not something to ignore. Standing up against disrespect doesn't mean overreacting or becoming aggressive. It means calmly, clearly, and immediately addressing the behavior. You can say, "I don't appreciate that comment," or "Please don't speak to me that way." The goal is to signal that you noticed, you care, and you will not accept it. The sooner you address it, the less room there is for repeat behavior. If you wait until it happens multiple times, you're not just fighting one instance. You're fighting a pattern you've already allowed to take root. Respect operates on a feedback loop. When you enforce your boundaries, you create a dynamic where the other person knows there are limits that must be honored. When you fail to enforce them, you create the opposite dynamic, where they believe there are no real consequences to crossing lines. In time, repeated tolerance of disrespect erodes your confidence. You start questioning whether your feelings are valid or if you're overreacting. You may even start lowering your standards, accepting less and less because you've trained yourself to normalize behavior you once would have rejected. Sometimes disrespect is blatant, but often it's subtle. Interrupting you constantly, making decisions without your input, mocking something important to you. These are forms of disrespect that don't always look like obvious aggression, but they still send the same message: your thoughts and presence don't matter here as much as mine. When you pick up on these signals, addressing them early is the key to preserving respect in the relationship. It's also important to understand that enforcing boundaries isn't about changing the other person, it's about upholding your own standards. Some people will adjust and treat you better, others won't, and that's where you have to decide whether continuing the relationship is worth sacrificing your self-respect. You can't control someone else's behavior, but you can control your own response and what you allow in your life. And every time you refuse to tolerate disrespect, you strengthen your sense of self-worth and reinforce the unspoken truth: you will not allow anyone to devalue you, not even once. Seeking validation from him places your self-worth in someone else's hands, which is one of the fastest ways to lose both your confidence and your power in a relationship. When you depend on his approval to feel good about yourself, you create a dynamic where you're constantly performing, adjusting, or changing to meet his expectations instead of staying true to who you are. At first, it might feel harmless, wanting him to like your outfit, appreciate your efforts, or praise your decisions, but over time, it conditions you to measure your value by his reactions. If he's pleased, you feel worthy. If he's silent, distracted, or critical, you feel unsure of yourself. That emotional roller coaster is exhausting, and it keeps you chasing a sense of validation that should be coming from within. The deeper issue with seeking validation is that it gives the other person control over your emotional state. If he has the power to make you feel good with a compliment, he also has the power to make you feel bad with a criticism, or even worse, with indifference. It's a dangerous imbalance because it teaches you to read every word, gesture, or silence as a reflection of your worth. Instead of standing confidently in your own decisions and identity, you start bending them to fit what you think will earn his approval. And the truth is, that kind of approval is never guaranteed. People's moods, priorities, and attention shift constantly. If you tie your self-esteem to his opinion, you'll always feel unstable. This doesn't mean you should stop caring about what he thinks altogether. In a healthy relationship, mutual appreciation and recognition are natural. But there's a difference between appreciating someone's feedback and relying on it to define you. If you don't already see your own value, no amount of outside praise will fill that void for long. Validation that lasts comes from knowing yourself, accepting yourself, and holding yourself to your own standards, not someone else's. One of the hidden problems with constantly seeking his validation is that it can subtly erode respect over time. Confidence is magnetic, and people respect those who hold their ground, but if you're always looking for him to approve before you act, decide, or speak, you send the message that you're unsure of yourself. That's when your boundaries start to weaken, because the desire to please him overrides the need to protect your own standards. He may start taking your flexibility for granted, or even unintentionally push those limits further, knowing you're unlikely to push back. Breaking the habit of seeking validation starts with self-awareness. Notice the moments when you're tempted to fish for a compliment or adjust your behavior to get his approval. Ask yourself, would I still make this choice if he had no opinion about it? If the answer is yes, you're acting from self-assurance. If the answer is no, you're probably acting from a need for validation. Over time, practice affirming yourself internally. Acknowledge your own strengths, achievements, and qualities without waiting for anyone else to confirm them. It's also about becoming comfortable with neutral or even negative feedback. Not everyone will agree with every choice you make, and that's okay. Someone disagreeing with you or not noticing your effort doesn't mean you failed. It just means they have their own perspective. The more you can stand steady in who you are without needing constant reassurance, the more grounded and powerful you'll feel. And when you no longer depend on his validation, the respect you gain from him and from yourself will be far deeper and far more lasting. Maintaining your own boundaries is one of the most critical aspects of building and sustaining respect in any relationship. Boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are guidelines that define how you expect to be treated, what you will accept, and what you won't. When you set boundaries, you are communicating your values, your needs, and your limits without apology. The problem arises when those boundaries are weak, inconsistent, or non-existent. If you allow someone to cross them without consequence, you are essentially teaching them that your limits are negotiable, and once that message is received, they will almost always test those limits again. Many people struggle to maintain boundaries because they fear conflict, rejection, or being seen as selfish. They might think, if I push back, he'll be upset, or I don't want to make things awkward. This mindset is understandable, but it's also self-defeating. Every time you allow someone to overstep, you trade a piece of your self-respect for temporary harmony. You might avoid an uncomfortable conversation in the short term, but in the long run, you invite ongoing behavior that undermines your confidence and your sense of safety in the relationship. Boundaries are also about self-definition. If you do not make it clear where you stand, you leave it up to the other person to decide. This is risky because not everyone operates with the same level of respect, empathy, or awareness. One person's joke might be another's insult. One person's helpfulness might feel like control to someone else. Without clearly communicating your boundaries, you open the door to misunderstandings, crossed lines, and resentment. Maintaining boundaries means being explicit about what works for you and what doesn't, and being consistent in enforcing them, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. The act of maintaining boundaries also sends a strong, unspoken message about your self-worth. People respect those who respect themselves enough to draw the line and keep it drawn. When you stand firm, you are saying, I value myself, and I will not compromise my well-being for the sake of pleasing someone else. This not only shapes how the other person treats you, but also influences how you feel about yourself. Each time you enforce a boundary, you reinforce your own belief that you are worthy of respect and care. The challenge comes when someone pushes against those limits, especially someone you care about deeply. They might react with frustration, try to negotiate, or guilt you into relaxing your stance. This is where many people falter, thinking that compromising just this once is harmless. But boundaries that bend too easily lose their credibility. The more you give in, the harder it becomes to re-establish them. This is why consistency is key. If you say you need space, then you need to honor that even when the other person tries to draw you back in. If you say you won't accept certain behavior, then you must follow through with consequences when it happens, no matter how difficult that feels in the moment. Maintaining boundaries isn't about being inflexible or rigid. It's about protecting your mental, emotional, and sometimes even physical well-being. It's about creating a healthy dynamic where both people understand and respect each other's limits. And it's about making sure that you never sacrifice your core values or your self-respect for the sake of keeping the peace. When you hold your boundaries firmly, you're not just protecting yourself from harm, you're also creating the conditions for mutual respect, trust, and a relationship where you can truly thrive without losing yourself in the process. Keeping your independence, both emotionally and financially, is one of the strongest foundations for maintaining respect in a relationship. Independence doesn't mean you don't love, trust, or lean on each other. It means you are a complete person who chooses to share your life, not someone who needs another person to feel whole or secure. When you hold on to your independence, you maintain a sense of identity and self-worth that exists outside of the relationship. This is crucial because it prevents an unhealthy power imbalance and ensures that your decisions are made from a place of choice, not dependency. Emotional independence means you're able to regulate your own feelings without relying entirely on someone else to manage your happiness or self-esteem. It's about having your own coping mechanisms, your own interests, and your own support system. If every emotional high and low depends on your partner's words, attention, or approval, you put yourself in a vulnerable position where your stability is in their hands. This not only creates pressure for them, but also makes you feel powerless when they can't or won't meet your needs in a certain moment. A healthy relationship thrives when both people are emotionally stable on their own, so that support becomes a gift, not a lifeline. Financial independence is just as important. Money is often tied to power, and when one person controls all the financial resources, it can lead to subtle, or not so subtle control over the other's choices. If you cannot support yourself or make financial decisions without someone else's permission, you may feel trapped or obligated to tolerate behavior you otherwise wouldn't. Having your own financial stability means you have the freedom to make choices based on what's right for you, not what you can afford to walk away from. It's not about keeping finances completely separate, but about ensuring you're capable of standing on your own if you need to. Maintaining independence in these ways also keeps attraction alive. People are drawn to those who have their own passions, goals, and lives outside of the relationship. If you lose yourself completely in your partner's world, it can create a dynamic where you become overly reliant on them for stimulation, purpose, or fulfillment. Over time, this can lead to resentment on both sides. You may resent feeling dependent, and they may resent feeling solely responsible for your happiness. Independence allows you to continue growing as an individual, which brings new energy and experiences back into the relationship. It's also worth noting that independence builds confidence. When you know you can handle life on your own, emotionally, financially, and practically, you move through the relationship from a position of strength, not fear. You're less likely to tolerate disrespect, manipulation, or unhealthy behavior because you know you're capable of walking away if you have to. This doesn't mean you want to leave. It means you have the freedom to choose to stay because you want to, not because you have no other option. That freedom is powerful, and it changes how you carry yourself. In practice, keeping your independence means continuing to invest in your personal growth, maintain your friendships, pursue your hobbies, keep your career or personal ambitions alive, and nurture your mental and physical health. It's about creating a life that is full and fulfilling, whether your partner is part of it or not. When you bring that kind of wholeness into a relationship, you inspire mutual respect and ensure that the connection is built on partnership rather than dependence. This balance creates space for love to thrive without suffocating either person, and it sets the tone for a relationship where respect is never questioned because both people know they stand strong on their own.